huge new U.S. visa restrictions
Yeah.
and connect them back to decades of political and, well, industrial history within India itself. And honestly, we have to start with the immediate kind of shocking headline.
It really is a shocker.
This U.S. decision to hike the annual H-1B visa fee
Yeah.
dramatically, up to $100,000.
$100,000.
Yeah, effective September 21st, 2025. I mean, this isn't a small tweak, right?
Mm-hmm.
The old range was, what, maybe $2,000 to $5,000?
Exactly. It's a seismic jump, an unprecedented barrier, really. And the reaction, well, it was immediate and pretty urgent. This isn't just some bureaucratic change. It's a potentially severe disruption for skilled Indian professionals, their families, and frankly, the companies that rely on them.
Right.
We saw reports that both Microsoft and JP Morgan put out internal advisories, basically telling employees outside the U.S., you need to get back here before that deadline.
Wow. Okay, that urgency really tells you how seriously companies are taking this. Why is that skilled talent pool so keen, so eager to try and jump that hurdle anyway?
Right.
This is where we need to zoom out, connect this policy shock back to India's own development story.
Exactly. To really understand that push factor, why so many Indian professionals feel compelled to leave, we actually have to go back, way back to independence in 1947.
Okay.
And here's something often forgotten. Back then, India's economic output was actually higher than China's.
Really? If you look right at the beginning, stats right after 1947, the nation's economic output, especially compared to other newly independent countries, it looked pretty good, didn't it? Maybe even a little ahead.
On paper, yes. But we really have to be cautious about that early data. That economic yardstick, it was faulty.
Why faulty? What was wrong with it?
Well, because the entire economic structure that existed then, it was just scaffolding, built solely for colonial commerce. The standard itself, the way things were measured, was defined by the colonizers. So at independence, you had over 90% of the people living completely outside that formal, standardized economy.
90%. Wow.
Yeah. They weren't part of the tax base, not really part of the commercial system the colonizers cared about. The infrastructure, they did build railroads, ports, the cities. It was only there to support the trade routes for colonial extraction.
Not for the internal population?
Not at all. The vast majority inside the country were economically pretty isolated.
And this whole transition, this independence, it happens at the exact moment the Cold War is kicking off, around 47.
Perfect timing.
Given the nation's sheer size, its location, its geopolitical importance meant it wasn't just going to be carved up or controlled by the U.S. or the USSR, right? It became a prize.
A prize to be influenced, exactly. And to understand the early alignment, you really have to look at the history. Think about Russia's long-term ambition, going back centuries.
Warm water ports.
Always the warm water ports. Access to the sea southwards.
Which means getting out of the Black Sea.
Right. But after World War II, the U.S. pretty much controlled the exit points, didn't they? The Dardanelles, the Bosphorus, through their alliance with Turkey.
Okay, so the Soviet Black Sea fleet was blocked.
Effectively blocked. So for the Soviets, influencing or, securing some kind of southern strategic path, maybe through India, that became really vital for their global game plan.
So the nation kind of plays its strategic independence card. Accepts socialist ideology, takes Soviet aid, all in that immediate anti-colonial wave. It feels like a really quick pivot.
It was. And there's also this immediate cultural friction with the West happening at the same time.
What kind of friction?
Well, it's often overlooked, but think about leaders like Gandhi, promoting traditional culture, non-cooperation, famously taking off his Western suit to spin his own cloth.
Right.
The reaction from early American and British observers, it was often dismissive, even negative. Yeah, the sort of implicit message from the West seemed to be, before you can play in our global system, you need to dress the part, act like a proper individual according to our rules. Well, the colonial legacy played a huge role. The British had focused development, infrastructure benefits almost entirely on the port regions, the big coastal city.
Right, where the resources were extracted.
Precisely, which left the vast majority of the country, over 90% of the people, in kind of non-standardized, less developed conditions.
Okay.
So when India became independent, it inherited this politically fragmented reality, a federal system over 30 states, all with their own interests.
And Prime Minister Nehru had to manage all of that.
He did. And when they started planning for industrialization, even taking aid from the Soviets, a really crucial political choice was made.
Which was?
Resource allocation had to be dispersed, spread out, to be seen as fair, accommodating the interests of all these states.
Ah, okay. So instead of concentrating industry in the most efficient zones.
Exactly. Instead of building a complete, efficient industrial system in maybe one or two ideal locations, factories got sprinkled around, sometimes in places that made little economic sense, like up in mountainous northern areas.
That this particular trajectory, defined by what I see as a fragmented approach to industrialization and growth primarily driven by external demand, has in fact created deep-seated structural impediments to equitable domestic development and, consequently, a truly integrated society.
Right. India's post-1947 journey, emerging from nearly 2 centuries of colonial rule right into the complexities of the Cold War era, it really placed it in a truly unique position on the global stage. Its strategic geopolitical importance, coupled with its firm stance against Western colonialism, naturally led it to adopt a socialist ideology, one rooted deeply in nationalism. Now, this wasn't merely a political choice. It reflected a profound national aspiration for self-reliance and true independence, heavily emphasizing state-led industrialization and public sector dominance. This historical context, it just necessitated a development path quite distinct from many others. Crucially, India possessed significant human capital, a large English-speaking educated class with robust mathematical and scientific skills, a legacy perhaps of foundational education, even if access was admittedly limited. This presented an unparalleled opportunity. The spectacular rise of its service sector, particularly the IT industry, well, that was a direct and pragmatic response to a burgeoning global demand that India was uniquely poised to meet. It transformed it, as some have noted, into the world's largest office. This strategy allowed a substantial portion of its moderately educated middle class to directly participate in the benefits of globalization, thereby securing a powerful voice for India in international organizations, global business, and politics worldwide. Now, while its industrialization process may have been decentralized and perhaps even less efficient in some respects, I'd argue this reflects the unavoidable reality of its vast federal structure and incredibly diverse populace, rather than a fundamental flaw in its overall developmental philosophy. It was, in many ways, a political necessity to ensure perceived equity across a newly federated nation with immense regional disparities.
So prioritizing political fairness and federal stability over maybe raw industrial efficiency.
You could say that. And that decision, while understandable politically, meant India never really built that comprehensive foundational industrial system, the kind that could absorb massive amounts of its own highly skilled labor.
Right. That created a fundamental deficiency in the development process.
Yes, a gap.
Which means you end up educating vast numbers of people,
Yeah.
millions of university graduates,
Highly capable people.
who then can't find the right kind of modern high-value jobs domestically because that large-scale industrial base just isn't there to the same extent.
But, while acknowledging India's historical significance, of course, I would argue that the nation's post-independence developmental choices have ultimately created profound and lasting imbalances. Just consider the situation at the time of independence. Over 90% of the population lived in largely agrarian, often semi-feudal rural conditions, with diverse, often informal economies. Economies largely untouched by modern industrial infrastructure or standardized governance. The subsequent industrialization process was, regrettably, not thoroughly systematic. This was partly due to India's expansive federal structure, comprising over 30 states, each with distinct political pressures and, well, demands for its own development projects. This led inevitably to a fragmented industrial base, with factories often scattered based on political expediency rather than, say, optimal resource allocation or genuine economic logic. Consequently, many industries struggled with low competitiveness. The high proportion of the service sector, particularly IT, boomed not from a robust domestic demand or the purchasing power of its own citizens, but let's be clear, overwhelmingly from serving overseas markets. This has resulted in a significant deficiency in the domestic modern employment market for a large number of university graduates, contributing directly to widespread underemployment and the pervasive phenomenon known as brain drain. This model, where wealth primarily circulates out of the country through imports of manufactured goods and where entrenched elites retain significant power, ultimately impedes the kind of broad-based economic benefits that truly uplift the general populace. And to elaborate on that point of fragmented industrialization and its consequences, we saw efforts to establish, for instance, multiple smaller state-run automobile plants rather than one or two consolidated efficient national factories. This approach, driven by perceived fairness and regional political demands rather than economies of scale, often led to higher unit costs and, frankly, an inability to compete effectively on the global stage. The service sector, particularly IT, indeed boomed, but it predominantly served overseas demand, not the needs of India's own domestic industrial or technological ecosystem. This meant a distinct lack of internal demand for sophisticated information technology and high-tech systems within India itself. I recall instances where research institutions in India were still operating with outdated computer systems while other nations were rapidly advancing their domestic tech infrastructures. This outward-facing service economy creates less internal economic circulation, a critical deficiency because it means that wealth generated within the country doesn't continue to multiply through domestic spending, investment, and job creation. Instead, the profits earned by servicing foreign companies often circulate outwards, used to pay for imported manufactured goods from other countries, further weakening the rupee and limiting the direct trickle-down benefits to ordinary people within India. The capital flight and the trade imbalance are really tangible consequences of this model.
I understand the basis of that argument, though I would frame it differently in terms of its overall impact and perhaps necessity. The decentralized industrialization, while undoubtedly presenting challenges to efficiency, was, as I mentioned, arguably a necessary political compromise in a vast and newly unified federal nation like India. It wasn't merely an inefficient choice. It reflected the immense political pressure and the fundamental democratic principle of accommodating diverse regional demands and ensuring perceived equity across a nation with vast disparities. More importantly, the growth of the IT and service industries, even if initially driven by external demand, was a remarkably pragmatic and strategic way for India to leverage its unique advantages. I'm speaking of its English-speaking, mathematically proficient workforce, a unique blend of colonial legacy and strong educational foundations that proved invaluable as the global IT revolution gained momentum. The existence of global submarine cable infrastructure already built for the internet dramatically facilitated India's ability to connect to and serve these overseas markets. By fulfilling this immense global demand, India found a powerful avenue for economic growth and large-scale employment for its educated populace that simply might not have existed otherwise, especially given the nascent state of its domestic manufacturing base at that time. This strategy allowed India to gain significant global influence, integrate into the world economy, and provide crucial services in IT, business process outsourcing, consulting, and even medical tourism. For instance, India's high-quality English-speaking medical professionals and advanced facilities attract patients globally seeking affordable specialized treatments, contributing foreign exchange and prestige. This demonstrates a strategic pivot that effectively transformed India into a global service hub, the world's largest office, providing tangible benefits and employment that otherwise would have been difficult to generate domestically.
I'm sorry, but I just don't fully accept that framing. The argument that the federal structure necessitated such fragmented industrialization, while acknowledging the political pressures, tends to gloss over a more fundamental and deeply entrenched issue: the retention and enduring influence of a significant class structure from the colonial era. These weren't just abstract elites, they were, and in many forms remain, entrenched land elites. This powerful, self-interested class actively worked against central government reforms, demonstrably slowing down critical land reform, impeding wealth redistribution, and ultimately hindering the modernization of agriculture and industry. This legacy led to a demonstrably less efficient allocation of resources across the board. Furthermore, some perspectives argue that applying a democratic system to a vast, largely less educated population, while noble in its ideals, became something of a burden to rapid economic growth. The focus, in such arguments, shifted from efficiently generating wealth to distributing limited existing rewards among competing factions. The stark societal division in India is clear. There's a relatively small Western integrated elite that largely benefits from this external demand-driven growth, and then there's a distinct, often struggling, grassroots reality for the vast majority. This means the supposed benefits of growth simply don't adequately reach the wider public, perpetuating inequality and limiting broad-based development.
I see.
That structural difference feels absolutely key, because the federal setup meant those old colonial-era elites, the big landowners, the merchant class, they kept a lot of local power, didn't they?
Immense local influence, and often they actively worked against central government reforms, slowing down land redistribution, modernization of farming, industry, sometimes for decades.
It really raises a tricky point, doesn't it? This viewpoint that we have to consider. The idea that Western-style democracy, while obviously great for freedom and for sharing the fruits of growth once you have them, it might be less efficient for kickstarting that growth in the first place, especially in a massive, heavily populated country needing basic resources developed fast.
That's the controversial argument, yes. For a nation with, say, over 1 billion people needing rapid infrastructure, basic industry, could that decentralized democracy, that federal system, actually be seen less as a perk and more as a drag on the sheer speed of modernization?
The pervasive lack of robust domestic industrial demand means that even India's highly educated individuals, particularly those graduating from technical departments in engineering and science, struggle significantly to find suitable high-skilled employment within India itself. This translates directly into a substantial and ongoing brain drain, where many of the nation's most talented young intellectuals actively seek careers overseas. We see this manifested quite clearly in the high-ranking officials of Indian descent in key positions across Singapore, Indonesia, South Africa. A phenomenon that, while showcasing individual brilliance, also dates back to the British colonial system that specifically trained them in English for administrative roles within the empire. While these individuals may contribute globally, and their success is a testament to their skill, the objective reality is that their talents are not being fully leveraged for domestic benefit. This leads to a diminished capacity for internal innovation, reduced investment in indigenous research and development, and a constrained internal market for high-skilled labor. Such a situation ultimately hinders the country's own technological progress and further limits the internal circulation of wealth that is so crucial for broad-based economic development. It's arguably a net loss of potential for internal growth.
I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning because it perhaps overlooks a broader, more nuanced picture of global integration and human capital. The significant presence of Indian intellectuals and professionals globally shouldn't be viewed solely as a drain of talent. Instead, it is equally, if not more profoundly, a testament to the exceptional quality of India's education system and the sheer caliber of its human resources, particularly in STEM fields. These individuals, far from being a simple loss, often maintain deep connections with their homeland. They are a significant source of remittances, sending billions of dollars back to India annually, which provides crucial foreign exchange and supports countless families. Furthermore, this diaspora actively enhances India's global influence, creating vital networks in technology, business, and politics worldwide. The ability for India to supply highly skilled programmers, engineers, and consultants for developed nations, and to offer global services in IT and consulting demonstrates a powerful and strategic leveraging of intellectual assets. This might not have been possible through a purely inward-looking industrialization model that struggled, frankly, to create sufficient high-tech domestic jobs at scale. While a robust domestic employment market is always desirable, of course, India's model has, for a crucial segment of its population, provided access to global opportunities, a degree of prosperity, and international exposure that might not have materialized otherwise. This represents a distinct and powerful form of global integration, even if it presents challenges for uniform domestic progress and requires ongoing policy adjustments to ensure broader inclusivity.
That this specific trajectory, while yielding some successes, yes, has unfortunately resulted in significant structural impediments. These have hindered broad-based domestic industrialization, created challenges for equitable wealth distribution, and limited the full utilization of India's intellectual resources for truly internal development, thereby creating and perpetuating a notable societal divide.
And often the educated upper classes are already quite integrated into that Western cultural framework, English speaking, familiar with the norms, which makes the move easier.
Right.
But that very success story, for some, just highlights this massive internal division within the country itself.
Okay, let's talk about that division. What are the systemic costs, the downsides, of being the global office without having that strong factory at home? What does it mean for the average person?
Well, the first major cost is a really significant outflow of wealth. It weakens the whole economy over time.
How does that work?
Think about it. The service sector workers, they earn foreign currency, mostly US dollars.
Right. Good salaries, globally competitive often.
Yes, but because India lacks that really robust domestic manufacturing base for consumer goods, where do they spend that money? They have to buy manufactured products, cars, phones, electronics, appliances from other countries.
Mostly China, Vietnam, places like that.
Often, yes. So India earns the dollars through services, but then that wealth essentially leaks right back out to buy the manufactured goods. It can't produce efficiently at scale itself. It's like a constant economic drain.
Okay, wow. So it doesn't circulate internally as much.
Exactly. And you see this reflected directly in the currency. The Indian rupee, despite the IT boom, has depreciated massively against the US dollar over the last couple of decades, over 100%.
Over 100% depreciate. That's huge.
It's huge, and it's a severe problem. It acts like a hidden tax on the middle class and the poor because it makes everything imported more expensive. Meanwhile, you look at China's renminbi over the same period, much more stable.
Right. And this structural problem, this wealth leak, this currency issue, it must deepen that societal divide you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. It creates a sort of two-speed society. You have the educated elite, often English-speaking, integrated into the global economy, mobile.
Living a very westernized lifestyle.
Sometimes,
Yeah.
yes. Afternoon tea, cocktail parties, that whole scene. And then you have the vast lower strata, people not working in IT, maybe not speaking English fluently, living in a very different economic reality.
A stark contrast.
A very stark contrast. The benefits of the service boom are quite isolated. They don't automatically trickle down or create millions of secondary manufacturing jobs in the same way a domestic industrial base would.
And this connects back to the political structure. For years, international observers were praising the nation's booming service sector. This was seen as the sign of a modern economy, moving past manufacturing.
Yeah, and we need to really zoom in here on what we could call the great paradox of the 1990s. The really powerful insight here, the kind of aha moment, is that the huge size of the service industry wasn't a sign of success. It was actually driven by the objective failure of the manufacturing sector to properly take off.
Failure because of that fragmented industrial base we just talked about.
Precisely.
Industrial growth compared to, say, more centralized, maybe authoritarian systems we saw elsewhere.
That's really the crux of a big debate. Centralized planning, whatever its political drawbacks, can sometimes accelerate initial development by forcing resources into specific growth areas. India's decentralized federal structure made that kind of top-down, rapid industrial push much, much harder to implement consistently, leading to the domestic job deficit we still see today.
Okay, let's try and bring this all together for you listening. We started with this immediate, huge shock, the $100,000 H-1B visa fee from the U.S.
A massive policy change.
Yeah, forcing big tech companies and skilled workers into some really tough, urgent decisions.
Mm-hmm.
When they traced the push factor, why so many people want to leave India, back to its history. Specifically, how industrial development after independence was fragmented, spread thin for political reasons.
Leading to a deficit in a complete industrial system.
Right. And that historical path, as he explained, led directly to the rise of India as the global office.
Driven by external IT demand, not internal needs. So while other places, like China, were consolidating resources to become the world's factory, this nation became the world's office. And that explosive service sector growth pushed its share of GDP up over 56%, a level you usually only see in fully developed post-industrial places.
Even though the actual industrial base was still comparatively underdeveloped. Creating these structural issues we discussed. Wealth leaking out, the rupee weakening significantly over time, and this deep societal divide between a globalized elite and the rest of the country.
And the core problem: not enough suitable domestic jobs for the highly skilled youth, pushing them to look abroad.
Both perspectives, I believe, profoundly highlight the immense complexity of India's evolution on the world stage. They demonstrate how deeply intertwined economic outcomes are with historical legacies,
intricate political structures, and deep-seated cultural realities. Understanding these divergent viewpoints offers a richer, more comprehensive appreciation for the ongoing debates about national development and the ever-evolving nature of global economic integration. There is undoubtedly much more to explore within this fascinating and critically important subject.